2008, the year that gave us core memory makers in the form of Smash Bros. Brawl, Persona 4, and Braid.
And they got no point to the game.
But for a kid who grew up a good 4 miles away from the nearest Walmart clearance bin, and the 2 games to my name were Mario Kart Double Dash and the f***ing bonus disc, I turned to YouTube. The platform had already been around for a while, but a year prior, I had already been hooked, and not because of Smosh or the PG version of 300, but from Let's Players. Chugga Conroy, Proton John, Matt and Pat, with the most influential being Nakata Lily. I was introduced to many niche but memorable titles that would irrevocably atrophy the tissue in my brain, including something called Toho? Don't worry about it. The big takeaway is that years later, I got introduced to the world of freeware games, with one of the first being Noitu Love, and its creator, Joakim Sandberg. For context, let's go back 2 years to the original, because I know most of you've never played this one. Noitu Love 1 was never on Steam, but you can get it on the developer's website for free. I'll put a link in the description. Developed by Joakim Sandberg, or Konjak, a true soul game developer from Sweden. Despite having no formal training, he's been making games for over a decade now, with the 2 in this video being made on the same engine as Knit Stories, I Wanna Be the Guy, and FNAF. It's a shame there aren't more videos on his YouTube channel talking about game design, because aside from some choice interviews about Noitu Love, and one Reddit post I'm cherry picking for this video, he posted like 1 video about game flow. He's basically a cryptid with how little information I have on his methods, and I am not combing through Twitter. Back to Noitu Love. The first thing you're going to notice is that it's a game for ants. The sequel to this runs on 640 by 480, so I have no idea how small this is. Pressing Alt and Enter makes it a bit more bearable, but I still have to squint to read the dialogue. In the year 2188, Dr. Darnicus Damnation and his army of mechanical grinning darns are threatening the modern world with his newest scheme, by using the forbidden Evilmatic machines to forcefully revert everyone into monkeys. It's up to the Peacekeeper League's golden boy, Noitu Love, and his partner, Lori, to stop him. The art style and the premise, it's reminiscent of a Saturday morning cartoon. You're telling me that despite Dr. Darn being a repeat offender, the Peacekeeper League only has 1 guy capable of doing anything? I fear we have a Demolition Man situation on our hands.
We're police officers. We're not trained to handle this kind of violence.
The first Noitu Love was an action platformer that was reminiscent of older handheld titles. Konjak himself pulled heavily from Metroid Fusion, both in its unobstructive control scheme and maze-like level design that sometimes doubled back on itself. But even though there's nothing in the form of upgrades, instead you rely on transformations to navigate the map and solve puzzles. You look at that title screen and think you're gonna get a monkey assist, but no, you are the monkey. Despite having to play this game under a microscope, the grinning darns themselves have a lot of personality. Their designs are simple and they look super smug, with some of my favorites being the bosses. Noitu Love wasn't Konjak's most polished game, and judging from old interviews and this small blurb on his website, he still maintains this opinion. But despite the growing pains that come from making your first game, it's hard not to call Noitu Love 1 charming. And going forward, he used what he learned to make Noitu Love 2, Devolution. For 100 years, the modern world has been freed from the terrors of Dr. Darnicus. After being defeated by the Peacekeeper League, he hasn't been seen since. But the people of 2288 are about to be thrust from this peaceful age into chaos. Various zones throughout the city have been transformed into areas from the past. The Grinning Darns have returned, and it's up to the Peacekeeper League's golden girl Zoda Rap and her support team, Almond and Tango, to stop them. This all seems very familiar. But before that, we're going to the tutorial. Compared to her predecessor, Zoda's moveset is comparably more versatile. Where Noitu Love 1 had an awkward time fighting enemies in the air, Devolution has Zoda super dash like it's DBFZ, with a simple click. The 3-hit combo from the first game is gone. Using the mouse, we click on Darns and mash the left mouse button to do what is essentially an infinite string of punches. But the mobility doesn't just stop with the mouse. You have special moves based on what direction you double tap. Your up special gives us the flash kick from the first game, and even though it doesn't make you invulnerable, it's pretty good for a get off me tool. Double tapping A or D is a rider kick, no question. It's good for clearing out basic enemies, and with virtually no recovery frames, it's your main mode of transportation. It's functionally the stinger from DMC. Rounding off the air mobility, double tapping S is a fast fall, not flashy but still valuable when dodging aerial threats. On to the weirder special moves. These next two are far more situational. The charge attacks, which involve holding down the left mouse button to use your psychic powers. Charging with your cursor on an enemy lets you command grab any basic darn, which I feel is supposed to be a crowd control option, but with how hectic encounters can be, and all your attacks clearing them so quickly, this never seems too useful, but it's still fun to throw a darn across the room. Alternatively, not locking onto an enemy has Zoda charge an energy ball. This is your only projectile, but since charging prevents you from using your homing attack or just attacking in general, it's hard to justify using it outside of one very specific scenario, which cements it as a niche attack. But what isn't niche is your one and only defensive option. This baby blue barrier right here is the only thing that can block enemy projectiles, that would otherwise be a pain to dodge normally. But remember, you can only deploy one of these at a time. So, she can fast fall, has a shield button, and special moves that are tied to directional keys. This game also was released on 2 Nintendo consoles, so all I'm saying is that it really wanted Zoda for Smash back in 2008. The DNA of the original is still here, but there's less platforming and even less in the way of puzzles, leaning more into the beat-em-up elements that the first game only flirted with. In Noitu Love 1, the game was balanced around your limited movement and reliance on transformations. It's funny then how Devolution improves on the original by doing away with transformations altogether, and adds some of their abilities to Zoda's moveset. We already talked about her mind powers, but arguably, the most important one is the ability to just crouch. This isn't a joke, the monkey will be missed. There are no dedicated puzzle segments anymore. Everything in the sequel is combat adjacent. It's all about knowing your moves and using them accordingly. There's enough going on where it isn't just mindless mouse clicking. It feels like a Contra-style run-and-gun game, where you manage various threats that materialize on screen. The controls are simple, but it's the situation the game puts you in is where the tension comes from. If Noitu Love 1 is a classic Mega Man game, then Devolution is Gunstar Heroes. Konjac wanted to make Zoda feel powerful, smashing through waves of darns that literally fall from the sky, and the speed is supposed to hammer that home. You can spam your rider kick through early levels, effectively sprinting to each boss encounter. Zoda's movement gives you so much freedom to maneuver the screen, that at times it almost feels too easy. Controlling Zoda doesn't come with a steep learning curve. By design, she's fast but not unwieldy. There are inputs, but their uses are apparent and the execution is simple. The game's real difficulty comes from its ability to escalate really quickly, but Konjac made the controls so tight and forgiving that all your mistakes feel fair. Most, if not all enemies, telegraph their attack before swinging. You get a projectile shield for slower encounters, and the levels don't obscure details when there are multiple enemies to keep track of. And speaking of the levels, similar to the first game, we got pixel art, but it's more stylized and detailed this time around, with one of the most notable changes being the smoothness of the animations. One of my favorite things going from the first game to the second is how much variety there is now with the environments. While not bad, I'd call the levels in Noitu Love 1 drab by comparison, with the most verdant area in that game being a f***ing graveyard. I really like this shift. It's more saturated and arcadey. Also, with the time travel angle, this legitimizes the variety in the levels. It's a small thing, but I appreciate that, and it's an excuse to show off more of that darn personality with the enemy designs. Aesthetically, the differences between Noitu Love 1 and 2 feel like comparing Aria of Sorrow to Dawn of Sorrow. Ignoring the portraits, the actual sprite work between the games isn't too dissimilar. The things that have changed are just touched up a bit instead of redesigned altogether. There's also more of an effort to push the comedic angle that was present in the first game, mainly with set pieces and situational humor. Like how in the first level, this helicopter shoots down a bunch of trees, and then after this boat shoots a few missiles at you, a tree attacks the boat? Or when you defeat the first boss, he sinks because it's a boat. I guess there's a bit of Metal Slug in here too. There are better examples of this later, but this should tell you what kind of game this is tonally. But despite all this, Devolution's improvements come with similar baggage the first one did, it's just in a different box. When I mentioned Noitu Love 1 dragging on a bit with its puzzles, Devolution's problems are tied to the presentation. For some reason, every enemy you take out is accompanied by a small screen freeze. Maybe this was to make the combat feel a bit more weighty, but after dispatching multiple enemies at once, it comes off as just stuttering. It's like I'm playing Gmod and I blow up too many NPCs at once. I'm willing to admit this is a preference thing, but these next two, oh man. The screen shake and the flashing lights, my lord. If you suffer from motion sickness or epilepsy, do not play this game on hard for your first playthrough. The problem ranges from kind of annoying because you'll only see the warning flash when dealing with bosses to, oh no, this fight at the start of level 2 might actually put you in the forever box. It almost did to me. You thought that TV bit at the start was a joke, didn't you? The worst part of this is that it's only bad on this level. It never gets that bad ever again for the rest of the game. And it sucks because it's so early. When people mention how nostalgia might blind them to things, this is what they meant, because I didn't remember this. Konjac probably just put all this because he thought it looked cool, so I can't even be mad. But let's not dwell on the negative and talk about something I really like. The real stars of this game. The sound and the music. It's like in that sweet spot between uncompressed Game Boy Advance beat-em-up sounds and the stuff you'd hear from Metal Slug. Mainly just the explosions. And aside from how sweet that mission start sound is, there's not a whole lot to say here, I just like it, but the music is what elevates it for me. Back before I knew about file dumping and music rips, I'd boot up this game just to listen to one of the many bangers on the OST. This game's music screams GBA sound font. Zoda, Almond has just been kidnapped. Go to the casino to get him back. All these tracks are mood setters, but the boss music is still my favorite. They're all so bombastic, so bouncy, that you know it's time to throw down, with one track in particular returning from the first game. The last thing to talk about is going to be the story. While it doesn't mention robot king like in the first game, it gets close, so if you don't want to be spoiled, then go to here. If you're familiar with the bosses of the first game, the 5 people watching this, Devolution seems to be retreading a lot of the same territory the first game did, up until we get past the casino. Tango notifies us and helps us locate the hidden Darn base. But something here seems off. These aren't Darns. And even the boss of this area isn't given a title card like everyone else. Okay, if I can pump the brakes a little bit here, this is the coolest fight in the game. This computer uses various TV channels for each attack, something DMC would shamelessly steal a decade later. After saving Almond, we return back to Peacekeeper HQ to see it's under attack, just like the first game, complete with an Evomatic? Tango, up until this point, has been delegated to the background. Even when she's your support, you're mainly focusing on Zoda and Almond, so she's easily forgettable. And then she appears with the monkey machine, the last one in existence. Thankfully, Tango gives us an exposition dump to answer all of our questions. In the year 2288, there was still a functioning Darn base that was hidden from the rest of the world. While Darnicus Damnation's body was missing and Doppelori captured, there was one who continued Dr. Darn's legacy, the Darn Master Computer, also known as Tango Source. Their plan? Create a carbon copy of the last Evomatic, and recreate the area holding the last Evomatic. We were never in 2288, it's actually 2888. If Noitu Love 1 was about evolution, then Devolution is about paradoxes. Ha. So why recreate an Evilmatic from 2288 specifically, if there would only be one left? Because if the Evilmatic can accelerate a human's evolution to develop psychic powers, what if the one being transformed wasn't human at all, but another Evilmatic? How very exhibit of you, devolution. More importantly, they chose this specific date because of Noitu Love. My favorite part of this plan isn't Tango becoming a 3-stage JRPG boss out of nowhere, but with what their real plan was. To wait, bide their time, to ensure the original Noitu Love would just not be around anymore. Tango pulled a Dr. Wily, and their last plan was just to outlast their greatest enemy. In Tango's words, Zoda isn't Noitu Love. With the irony being, she's way better than the original. Tango's biggest blunder was telling Zoda where the Darn base was, and accidentally killing off not only the remnants of the Darn army, but her other half as well, ensuring their demise. The areas from the past still remain, but without the Darns, peace is restored. So why talk about this? It takes like an hour and a half to beat all 3 campaigns, maybe 2 hours on hard. And despite being on Nintendo consoles, it didn't really set the world on fire or anything, but it didn't have to in order to leave an impression on me. The time to complete doesn't translate to the amount of enjoyment you can have with anything. Everyone has that one obscure game from their childhood that they still remember, and this is mine. Noitu Love 2 was my core memory maker. These games are important to me because they show the evolution of one man and his craft as a game dev. They weren't the idealized game he wanted to make, but they both paved the way for something greater, something bigger, and that's just really cool, man. Like, it's inspirational that Konjac is still around and making games, even if we don't see the hundreds of prototypes he's made over the years. Am I biased? Yes, I played this game before I was 10, and playing it again more than a decade later, I still love this game to bits. Go play it, go follow Konjac on Twitter, and this won't be the last time I talk about Joakim Sandberg. But until then, thanks for watching. I got more ideas in the works, and please, hit all the buttons if you liked what you saw, and tell me in the comments if you didn't. Take care of yourselves, and see you next time.